Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's with great respect and humility we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the November 18th Business Committee? Moved by Chair McKay. Seconded by Trustee Higginson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Actually, is there anyone opposed to adoption of the November 18th, 2020 Business Committee minutes? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. Moving on to item 7, presentations. We don't have any this evening. Item 8, senior staff reports, the Sophie report, and I'll turn it over to Secretary Treasurer Walsh.
Good evening, board, and thank you, Chair. This evening, the first item on the agenda is the Statement of Financial Information pursuant to the Financial Information Act. It's a fairly lengthy report, but I do want just at the get-go to highlight that all the way up to page 58 of the agenda is all items that have been previously reviewed, passed by the board. So the financial statements, the auditor's report, etc. So really, obviously, we're happy to answer any questions about the material that's within those documents, but really the new information that the board will not have seen before today associated with the Sophie is starting on page 58. So I'll go briefly through these documents here, and obviously there also is a recommended motion that we are required to pass information appropriately according to the Act. And I do want to thank and welcome back Director Lowe here, who did most of the work. And is also here to assist in answering any questions that the board has, and it's very, very nice to have her back to the district and to get the chance to work with her. So page 58 and 59, just some good news. We don't have a schedule of debt. So really what we'll focus on is starting on page 60. And so you'll notice what normally, and for anyone that hasn't seen a Sophie report before, would be surprised to see a whole bunch of personal information and salary information of a variety of our employees. And that's strictly because of the requirements of the legislation require that anyone's total remuneration, so your salary, your benefits, your pension, that $75,000 or more needs to be reported. And then of course, we are in a system with professionals, and so most, or not most, but many, particularly the 75,000 number hasn't changed in a number of years, and so you'll see a lot more teachers on there than you might have in past years. Also, trustees don't crack the $75,000 in total remuneration, of course, but we're required to report those numbers as well. One thing I want to highlight, and of course we're happy to answer any questions, is that what you won't see, and if you think about the fiscal year for us, what you won't see is a significant amount of lower expenses associated with COVID. You will see some, but for instance, when we look at folks involved with our international program, so far this year they would have very few expenses associated with that, but because we weren't cut off from travel and those issues until spring break of last year, the expenses up till that are reflected here. So they're down a little bit, and that's some work that we're doing, but just for your information. So obviously, again, happy to answer any questions on that front. The second part of the of the new information that also is, I think, important to review is suppliers who have had payments that are $25,000 or more. And so there's multiple pages, of course, of those suppliers. And one of the things that is not part of this report, but that staff does, is we review any variances on a year-to-year basis to determine a trend line. So are we spending more in this area? If so, why? Is it inflation? Is it time that maybe a certain supplier has now gone above 25,000 in a number of small transactions that wouldn't have involved going out to request for proposal, but now we realize that if you add them up, they're significant, and so maybe we do, as a district, to get the best deal that we can, want to proceed with on that basis. So we're having those conversations internally, but happy to answer any questions on that front. So really, that's the highlight of the report. But for the purposes, this is a document committed to transparency. And so once the board passes it, we send it to the ministry, and it does get posted on their website. So subject to questions, the recommended motion is there for trustees to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh, for the report. Before we entertain a motion, are there any questions for Mr. Walsh? I don't see any questions. Is there someone willing to move the motion? Trustee Higginson, go ahead.
I just need a seconder.
My apologies. Moved by Trustee Higginson, seconded by Trustee Berzovic. Go ahead, Trustee Higginson, if you'd like to introduce the motion.
Thanks. The Business Committee recommend that the Board of Education of School District 68 and Nanaimo Ladysmith approve the school district statement of financial information / SOFI report as presented for the year ending June 30th, 2020. It's a formality and pretty self-explanatory, and I appreciate the tremendous amount of work that's gone into it to keep us transparent by our staff. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Higginson. So we have the motions seconded by Trustee Berzovic. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? If you are, please indicate so in the chat. I don't see any trustees in opposition. The motion carries. Moving on to item 8.2. Administrative procedures. Again, Secretary Treasurer Walsh, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Lowe, thank you for attending this evening. I think you're able to head home if you'd like. So thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first item is stemming from the Policy Committee, and so perhaps other members of the Policy Committee do want to come into to provide a little bit more background. But the first one is on anti-vandalism. So currently anti-vandalism is in a policy. And so the Policy Committee had a look at it and realized a couple of things. One, it didn't necessarily fit in the policy framework that we have. And number two, it needed to be updated in either event because we're actually not performing the policy. So for instance, there's a vandalism committee that's struck by virtue of the policy. So either we need to start following it or we need to amend the policy. So what we thought and what we're recommending is actually moving the policy to be an administrative procedure. The draft administrative procedure, it's unnumbered, is there as well. And you'll see there's quite a lot of overlap between what the policy and the administrative procedure is. If the board did pass the motion, a couple things would happen. It would go to 30 days of consultation, just if the public has concerns about its movement from policy to administrative procedure. The other issue, of course, is there wouldn't be a formal committee. And then three, the intention of staff would be to probably provide either a as needed, well, at least a yearly, but then perhaps in addition an as needed report on the vandalism, because the monthly reports are not necessarily as good from a trend perspective, and I don't think have necessarily the same amount of impact as a yearly report that we can say, okay, year to year we're in positive stead. So that's the basis for the recommendation, and perhaps someone from the policy committee would want to add their thoughts as well.
Is there anyone from the policy committee that'd like to speak?
Yes, please, Chair.
Go ahead, Trustee McKay.
Thank you. So part of the review was also the acknowledgement of how long that policy has been on the books and been sort of left within policy governance, whereas we know that over the course of the past few years that predominantly this has been staff work. I was a stakeholder at one time sitting on that committee, and the work was very preventative in nature, and with many of those measures in place across the district that are utilized again and again as issues arise, I think that the committee has become redundant, and so I wouldn't recommend to the board that it be reinstituted. I think that moving it into procedure fits quite well within the work that we're doing, and we are able to, make adjustments on the go, and as bigger items arise, the board will have an opportunity to look at those vandalism issues as they come up. So I believe it fits well. I believe the committee felt that it fits well as a procedure as opposed to a policy.
Thank you, Trustee McKay. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Hearing none. So I think, Mr. Walsh, perhaps what we could do is ask for a motion, someone to raise the motion in relation to this item, and then deal with the proposed APs after that. Would that work for you? You're muted, but I think I saw the head nod there.
Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So can I get someone to move the motion?
Chair, could you read the motion? I'm happy to move it on your behalf.
Yes, I can. Thank you. So the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, delete policy 2.14 anti-vandalism and circulate this policy removal as a notice of motion for 30 days, utilizing the consultation process as per Board Governance Section 1.2.7. And I believe I see Trustee Barron seconding, or sorry, Trustee McKay seconding the motion. Would you like to say anything further, Trustee McKay?
No, thank you, Chair. I think I've covered it so far.
Okay, is there any discussion? Trustee Brzovic?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been going back and forth on this one over the past week. I think for me, as long as we get information quickly enough, if there are trends starting to crop up where we can take preventative actions that, because some preventative actions, sorry, I moved my hands, have budgetary implications. For example, if we decided to expand our use of cameras outside at schools, as long as this won't slow down that process, I can be comfortable with it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I don't know if that's a question through the chair to Mr. Walsh. I think it is.
Okay.
Through Mr. Chair. So yes, Trustee, there's no intention of slowing down a process like that. What would likely happen is, let's take the example that ND goes through a significant amount of vandalism. We would likely, as staff, come to the board and say, there's a relatively serious problem right here. We want you to know about it. It's not kind of the yearly issues that we've seen. We want to contemplate a solution that may involve cameras. We're going to talk with the local, parent community, talk with our local associations and unions to talk about what that would look like, and come back and report to the board next steps. So absolutely, and in fact, I think the intention would be is that it would be even more focused to highlight the issues that we are concerned about, rather than that monthly churn that might have a high number, but we don't know that it's an ongoing issue as much as if it's a yearly report plus individualized specific concerns.
Okay. Well, given that, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Walsh. I can support the motion in that, given that.
Thank you, Trustee Borzovich. Do you have a follow-up? Or are you satisfied with?
I'm satisfied, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? I guess I'm next on the list. I guess Mr. Walsh's report gave me what I needed to support the motion. I think it is nice to know what's happening throughout the district with respect to vandalism. So my hope is that we would hear from staff if there are any sort of more significant vandalism activities in the district, and I would look forward to getting the reports on a somewhat regular basis to see sort of what's going on, but I would support the motion. So if there's no further questions or comments, I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? I don't see anyone opposed, so the motion carries. So Mr. Walsh, if you'd like to continue on with your report on the proposed APs, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll pass by the vandalism because that's a kind of, it'll be sent out alongside the draft motion to remove for consultation, and it'll be back in in January. So the next one is AEDs. And so just before I start, the staff right now, one of the things that we're trying to do is where we're seeing, obviously the board is instructing us to take action or create an administrative procedure. Of course, we're going to. The other thing that we're hopefully you're going to see on a regular basis is APs that kind of address some of the questions that we get regularly from our communities. And so our communities are able to, not have our principals guessing what the board's practice might be, or not, if facilities, has a document somewhere that we practice regularly, there's no reason that it wouldn't be appropriate in an administrative procedure. So again, it's down the line, we're trying to be as transparent as we can so the public has immediate access to their query. But then the other side of the coin is internally, we also know who's responsible for what. And so what you'll see in these APs as we progress, and hopefully we'll bring one a month is the goal amongst our departments. But so here's an example where the board has directed staff to make sure that we have an AED at all secondary schools. And so we thought that it would be pretty important that, given that direction is there, it's a motion. But once the minutes are gone, that doesn't necessarily show to the public that this is exactly what's expected and how that's going to flow. So this administrative procedure sets out exactly that. So where and when, the exceptions and perhaps expansion of when they might be required in a school, the department responsible for it and ensuring that training is appropriate. And then finally, a mechanism for review, because I know that the board is interested in seeing the efficacy of these machines to see if potentially an expansion at a future date might be warranted. So we thought that those three aspects are the highlights of the AP. It's fairly simple, but hopefully it'll allow our community to see exactly what should be expected. And interestingly enough, I'd add, is when we did bring it to our district leadership team to discuss, we quickly found out that one of our secondary schools is going to be on the list to get a new install that wasn't aware that this was going to be proceeding. And so again, because of that transparency, we're able to determine that. So with subject to questions, we'll put this into play immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Are there any questions related to the proposed AP for automated external defibrillators? Not seeing anything. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Walsh. If you want to continue on with the next one.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next one is emergency kiosks. And so here's an example that came from a relatively regular questions from our parent community, as well as for principals. And also to give principals support to be able to respond to questions. And so essentially what this says is that we're, I think, aware of what an emergency kiosk is for the most part. So often you'll see them, they're the tin cans filled with various supplies in case of emergency, earthquake, etc. To support our students and staff while parents are reunited with their students in the event of an emergency. So typically, well, not typically, there are fundraised by the parent community or funded by school funds. The district doesn't purchase them proactively centrally, so facilities does not have a budget to go this direction, nor does learning services. So where they are present on sites, that's how they are fundraised. So what we do often get is, well, wait a second, it's aging and it needs to be replaced, or who's responsible to make sure that the cans of soup are not expired? Who's responsible to make sure that the blankets, if they're moth-eaten, get replaced, etc. And so we just wanted to make it clear, particularly when parents are going to go fundraise to install one of these, that just because the fundraising is there initially doesn't necessarily mean that the board, the district centrally, is going to take on the long-term expense. But the minor maintenance, so graffiti, if there's a broken lock that's fixable, issues like that we will do through our normal work order system as if it was the maintenance of the building. But say the building or the emergency kiosk is subject to a major structural defect, or water leaks in unbeknownst to anyone and things get ruined, we wouldn't replace the unit or the material in it using central district funds. And so this just highlights exactly what the process would look like and who's responsible for these kiosks.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Are there any questions or comments from any trustees? I might be the lone one here, Mr. Walsh, if I may. So I guess thank you very much for this work. This has been an item that I think is of great importance and is really important to the overall emergency preparedness strategy for the district. And it's an item that I think providing certainty on is also very important, because I can imagine the costs of providing these kiosks can be quite high. That being said, I'm interested in opportunities for the district to help out with those costs. So I'm not sure if this is the place to have those discussions, but I like to make that position or position known, that I believe these should be part of our facilities and we should be providing them. But I'll just leave that at that. And I know this is an administrative procedure, so you're not necessarily looking for a decision. I'm just sharing my opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So is there any other trustees who would like to add to the discussion? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. We'll move on to item 9, correspondence referred from the regular board meeting. We don't have any. Unfinished business. Moving on to Cole North Oyster traffic issues. Mr. Walsh, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the board requested to find out about the cost of a temporary crossing guard at Cold North Oyster. So as the board can see, if we were to hire a crossing guard, given the time of year that we're at, the prorated cost would be approximately $7,500 to $8,000. I can say we have had discussions with the school as well, so if the board proceeds with the motion, we will be able to have that individual in place almost immediately upon direction. So we've talked with HR, etc. We were also asked to come to the board and just give a little bit of background on what the voluntary programs would look like. So for instance, a student-led program, or alternatively a parent-led program. And we've had discussions with the school, and of course all our schools are a little bit different, and so there are schools with voluntary programs, but Cold North Oyster is a little bit of a tough one, as I understand it, because of the amount of kids that are bused, which means they're leaving right after school. So you're already taking out a fairly big chunk of your of your student population from being able to volunteer, as well as there's the safety concerns that have risen in that area generally. With respect to parent volunteers, it's not necessary that we couldn't proceed in that direction to create a program like that. But again, in a timely fashion, it's pretty unlikely. And so if the board was looking at getting a crossing guard in place in the short term, we would suggest that the motion to fund it would be appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. We have a question from Mr. Zveer.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Walsh. You know QP's position on this. If it's our work and it's established that it's our work, it should maintain being our work. So when I see that parents may or students may do it, always leaves me with a bit of that safety precaution and how they're accountable. And I know we do have some schools where the students do it, and it's usually in areas where are not high risk. We have our crossing guards from Solaire areas and that where they were deemed to be necessary, and I do believe it should be done by QP. So I'm just raising that concern. I don't believe parents should be asked to task with that, because if they're missing, who's accountable? So.
Thank you, Mr. Zveer. Are there any other questions or comments? Trustee Higginson, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Seeing the limited discussion on this, what I'd like to do is move a motion that the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, fund the cost of a temporary crossing guard for École North Oyster to support student safety during drop-off and pickup for the remainder of the 2021 school year. This expense will be reviewed during the 2021-22 budget process in conjunction with other safety mitigation strategies put into place.
Thank you, Trustee Higginson. We have a seconder, Trustee Wilkinson. Would you like to motivate the motion, Trustee Higginson?
Sure, thanks. You know, we had the report and a lot of this was discussed last month about the safety issues at the school, but I had an interesting conversation with a parent this week from the school that I thought would help motivate our decision on this, and that is that this parent actually makes the conscious choice to drop her kids off late to school every day because of how unsafe she feels the parking situation is. So, you know, not only is there a safety issue, but there really is an educational issue to this. So this is a temporary solution in hopes that, as we've discussed, we will address the bigger infrastructure issues through our long-range facilities plan. And, you know, we will review this and the cost. It's very clear on here to me that this is until the end of this school year in hopes that we can come up with a more permanent solution. And that if we are going to repeat it for next year, we'll have a discussion about it. So this is just for the North Oyster portion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Trustee Higginson. Next on the list is Trustee McKay.
Thank you, Chair. My question is through you to the Secretary Treasurer. Should the board move forward with this motion, where would the funds be coming from? Would this be funded from a portion of our previously allocated surplus, or would the funds to pay for this position be found within our operating budget?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the previously allocated surplus, the board set aside $50,000 for emergent items, and so we would envision that cost of approximately $8,000 would flow from that $50,000 fund.
Do you have a follow-up, Trustee McKay?
I don't. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Is there any trustees opposed to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you. So moving on to item
Sorry, Chair. Just quickly before I move on, I just had a further comment on the overall issue. Do you mind? Oh, you're muted. I'm busy. Sorry, you were muted.
I said Normally we wouldn't, but because we have a fairly short agenda and this is on topic, go ahead.
Thank you. It's just on the topic overall of traffic safety, and what the discussion on this motion actually had me, as we were looking at, the possibility of other schools and what happens if other schools want a crossing guard, and that we have other schools that have them. And it made me think about the amount of times we hear about this, and I'm wondering about our, one of the concerns was that this might cause more schools to ask us for crossing guards. And to me, that identifies that we may have safety issues at a lot of our other schools, and that did come up in the conversation. And so I'm wondering about, I know some other districts, have a process overall, like a comprehensive plan that addresses school safety and traffic. And I'm wondering if we have such a plan, because if we do, I'm unaware of it. And if not, if there's an opportunity for us to discuss as a board if this is something that we would like to entertain, because what the focus on North Oyster did was also, let us hear that there are other concerns elsewhere, and that we maybe need to start looking at this in a more comprehensive way. I guess if the Secretary Treasurer wants to respond, that would be great.
Sure. So through you, Mr. Chair. So we do have funding that the board supports for active transportation, which also would envision, of course, safe access to our schools. So what I wonder that may be valuable is coming back and asking for a report on how those funds are expended in January or February, to give staff a little bit of time to prepare, to be able to report back. And then that would give the board the opportunity to see how that program is going, and also determine whether additional funds or processes should be required through board motion.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Did that satisfy your question, Trustee Higginson?
It did, and if the board is amenable, I would love to, at some point when our staff has the appropriate amount of time, taking into consideration the fact that there might be budgetary implications, if we need to have a further discussion about whether they should bring that report back. But I just think that as a board, we should sort of look at whether we have a comprehensive traffic safety plan in place. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Higginson. So moving on, item number 11, new business. I don't believe we have any. Number 12, for information, nothing there either. Ms. Matthews, are there any questions this evening? No questions. Thank you, Ms. Matthews. And can I get a motion to adjourn? People aren't ready to go home yet. Okay, oh, everyone jumped on board there. Great. So moved by Trustee Barron and seconded by Trustee Higginson. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Have a good night.
Have a good